Thank you. Okay.
Окей. Добрый вечер, дорогие коллеги, участники сообщества. Рада вас видеть сегодня на нашей встрече. Почему мы решили провести эту встречу? Мы много обсуждали тему поиска работы и как порой сложно и как долго приходится ее искать. И в этот момент мой коллега по центру Дэвиса Дэн сказал, что у меня есть свой довольно сложный опыт поиска работы. При этом Дэн закончил аспирантуру Гарвардского университета. И, казалось бы, для человека с такой степенью дальше все дороги открыты. Однако не все так просто. И мне показалось, что этот опыт интересен, и поэтому мы договорились с Дэном, что сегодня он поделится как раз вот этим опытом, каково приходится даже выпускнику Гарварда дальше двигаться по карьерному пути, каково это искать работу и так далее. Поэтому сегодня у нас Дэн, слово ему, и я выключаюсь и слушаю так же, как вы. Всем спасибо.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone for coming. Как уже мы сказали, я буду говорить по-английски. Ну, можно по-русски, вопросы, дискуссия. So I wanted to just tell some about my own experience. As Sasha has said, even for someone who has a PhD from an institution like Harvard University, it can be challenging to try and find a good job, especially if your career is somehow interrupted in some way. My career, well, I want to start by just going and giving a short overview of my different jobs that I've had in my career, and then you can see some of the my experience, and hopefully that will help to make things clearer. So you see that I finished my undergraduate degree just before the millennium, and then in 2000 I began my program aspirantura at Harvard University in the Department of Government, and I received my PhD in 2008. It was very propitious at the time. It seemed like it was. I was working at the time on electoral competition in political parties, comparing the experiences of Brazil after the end of its military dictatorship and Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. However, if in 2008, it still seemed that Russia was a place where electoral competition and free activity of political parties might still be an interesting topic of study. Clearly, after this, electoral competition and democracy in Russia became less of an interesting topic of study. And for 1 year, then I went to the University of Rochester, and I had a postdoctoral fellowship. This was just for 1 year. And if for researchers and academics in the humanities or in social sciences, a 1 year or sometimes a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship is a typical thing to do, and it's an impressive thing to do before you begin a job as a professor or instructor. And really, the main goal of such a postdoctoral fellowship should be, if you're in the humanities or social sciences, to begin publishing articles, academic articles in journals that people will find to be impressive, so that your CV builds with impressive articles and perhaps even a book manuscript. Now, during the year that I was a postdoctoral fellow, I admit I didn't publish very much. I had one article that I had been working on and I finished, but I didn't publish many others. And I had a goal to finish my manuscript for my book, to try and find a publisher that would be very impressive. In the United States, it's certainly a university press that you would like to have publish the book version of your dissertation. Now, this is a different track from people who are in the sciences, especially in biology, chemistry, medicine, other sciences, physics, especially where there's laboratory work. It's more common to have a postdoctoral fellowship that might last for 3, 4, 5 years. And some people even have one postdoctoral fellowship and then another postdoctoral fellowship if you're in the sciences before you can become a tenure track professor. And this is the real goal from the academic point of view. In the United States, we have this important distinction between people who teach on the tenure track, which is a long-term contract. Usually it's a contract for about 5 or 6 years, with the promise that at the end of that contract, you will be reviewed. And if you pass this review, then you will have a perpetual contract with the university. So this is really, from the perspective of academics in America, this is the best kind of job to be able to get. But many people do not pass their tenure review, and so they do not continue at that university with a perpetual contract. Now, some people leave earlier to go, especially if they get a job at a better university, to get a tenure track job there. Now, for myself, during the years I was at Colgate University, for 6 years, it was considered a pretty good job, not the best university like Harvard, but it was a great thing. People thought that I had a job that was on the tenure track. But honestly, although I was very interested in research and teaching, I had some difficulties in attracting students to my classes. Some of the classes that I was interested to teach, students thought that topics were too obscure. People became less and less interested in Russia during most of this period. And so I had to teach classes on other topics that I was not so expert on. And so I had to develop more expertise for my teaching. And the important thing is I didn't publish many articles. I published only one other article. I did not finish and prepare my book manuscript to be published as an academic book. And so by the time I was nearing the end when I would be reviewed, I still had a good chance that I might be able to I still had a good chance that I might be able to pass my tenure review because I had done a lot of teaching and this was important for the university. But I had a little bit of a crisis myself of what I thought would be a good path for me for work. And I decided that it was more important, really, than teaching in university about government and political science, to actually take part in politics and to try and work for change here in America, where we do have democracy and the chance for political change and working for the democratic system. And so I quit my job at Colgate University before my review for tenure. And I took up a completely different kind of a job, working in a political campaign when Bernie Sanders was a candidate for president in the United States back in 2016. You might remember this race that he was running as a candidate within the Democratic Party in the United States against Hillary Clinton to see which one of the two of them would get to be the candidate from the Democratic Party. I had great hopes that Bernie Sanders would win, and if I worked on his campaign, Maybe with my my experience in the fields of studying Russia and Eastern Europe, maybe I would go get a chance to work in government in some kind of diplomatic position. Of course, Bernie Sanders did not win. He did not become president. And so I was left when the campaign ended, really without much hope. I was kind of at a moment of difficulty in my career. I had lots of experience teaching and a good degree, but to try and get back into a tenure track job at a university would have been very challenging because I did not have many publications to put on my CV that would impress people. So briefly, for a few months, I got a teaching job at a community college. Now in America, this is a very common type of educational institution. I'm not sure really what is the equivalent in Russia or Eastern Europe or even Western Europe, but a community college in America will offer not a university degree. So it's not, when you complete it, it's not the equivalent of a full bachelor's degree. It only is for 2 years, and it's sort of like a half bachelor's degree. But there are many community colleges all around America for students who are unable to go to university, or maybe they are not ready to do a full 4-year degree for a bachelor's degree, but they want to try it out. Some people go just for a few classes for some training in some particular field, but most community colleges teach many fields of study, but not at the same, not in the same way that universities do. So for example, political science, my field of expertise, is not offered in many community colleges. Some will have teaching in history. I was able to get a job as an instructor of economics, which I knew enough about from my own research that I was able to do a good job, I thought, teaching economics. Now, my position here, though, was called adjunct instructor. And this is really sort of the lowest position, the lowest kind of contract you can have. In the American system, it's a contract to teach one course, and then maybe when the end of that course is done, maybe they will give you a contract to teach another one course. Sometimes you can teach 2 courses in 1 semester, but this is not steady employment. It's not very good. It's not very good pay, and it's not. It doesn't usually have the benefits of health insurance and other benefits that a contract job would have. But for someone like me in my position, especially I was trying to find a job right in the same city where I had been living and working before when I was working on the campaign for president. It was the best quick solution for me to find some kind of work right away. And indeed, when I finished the teaching, the person who was the head of the economics department was impressed, and he thought, oh, you know, maybe if you do some more teaching as adjunct, then we will offer you a long-term contract. Maybe not a tenure track contract, but maybe a contract for 1 or 2 years as an instructor. However, this did not happen. My wife, at that point in 2016, decided that it was going to be time for her to do her PhD. And so we moved away from Virginia, where I had been teaching as an adjunct instructor. We moved to Texas, over 1,000 miles away. And my wife did her PhD at Texas Tech University. And I was hired by Texas Tech University as a non-tenure track instructor. So this was a better position than adjunct instructor because I had a contract for 1 year, and for many instructor positions, it's a good chance your contract will be renewed. And in fact, this happened. My contract was renewed, and I worked at Texas Tech University for 4 years. Although during this time, even though I began as a teaching faculty, a non-tenure track instructor, it turned out that what the department needed there was actually someone to work on developing their online courses. They had one person working on it, and I worked as a sort of an assistant director, although really I was called instructor, and I was still teaching classes in the classroom. And at the same time, I was helping to administer this online system of courses. We had about 4,000 or 5,000 students online every semester. And so it needed a lot of organizational work or administrative work. And then my colleague, who was the director, left to go do another job. She herself had a PhD in political science, but she actually left to go to a job in private industry, working for a software company designing educational software. And her experience with online teaching and administrative work with online courses gave her a good basis to go and leave the academic field altogether and to work in private industry. And when she did this, I became the director of the online system, and this was a big administrative job. And indeed, I found this kind of challenge, administrative work, to be exciting for me. I felt it was much more productive than trying to write academic articles that, in truth, I was worried no one was going to be interested in the kinds of research topics that I was working on. So I really enjoyed this. But then in 2020, when my wife was done her PhD and we did not want to live in Texas anymore, we decided to move back to Massachusetts. And this was a risky move because we did not have jobs here in Massachusetts ready to come for us. And we simply moved here and then began to look for jobs while we were here, my wife and I. My wife herself, when she first moved, she was still attending her university remotely. And for 1 year, she had a sort of a remote fellowship to complete her dissertation. But I was looking for whatever kinds of jobs I could get. I got some teaching as an adjunct instructor for the Harvard Extension School. This is a division of Harvard that is open to any students who want to go. They don't have to apply. It's not difficult to get in. And so it's a sort of a much less prestigious section of Harvard. And many of the classes are not taught by the regular Harvard faculty. And they're paid much less. And indeed, I was working as an adjunct instructor. I also did some teaching as an adjunct instructor at Endicott College. This was an interesting thing because there was no need for my teaching at Endicott College in political science. And so at Endicott College, I taught a course on world history. And again, this was not my expertise, and I had to do some work to develop expertise to teach a class in this field that was different from mine. But as someone who has some background experience and knowledge about history, I was able to do this. And indeed, history is one of the fields, along with economics, that is often in demand to be taught at colleges and universities and even community colleges in the United States, whereas political science or sociology are not so often necessary. So I really had to be ready to do some work outside of my own area of expertise, even to get a job as adjunct instructor, just as a start. However, while I was teaching at Endicott, I was able to get a job at Harvard University for the regular faculty in the government department, teaching political science classes. And this was a great opportunity. It was better pay. And the students were the regular Harvard students, not graduate students, only undergraduate students. But I was able to get a contract that would be for 1 year at a time. However, I was only able to get a contract to be a part-time lecturer. So I taught half the course load and received half the pay that other regular tenure track professors were getting. And even if I had had a full-time position as lecturer, it would still be a lesser position than a tenure track professor would have. So as a result, while I was doing this, I had to find some other jobs on the side to make some more money. I taught as an adjunct instructor at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, which is right in Cambridge nearby Harvard. I did that for a semester. That was a good experience. I also began working as a bartender at a restaurant in my town, which is a ways from Cambridge, Massachusetts. I did that over the summer. Obviously, many people in the restaurant that I was working with, they didn't have much education. They thought it was very strange that someone with a PhD from Harvard was working as a bartender, making drinks at a restaurant. But in truth, it paid very good money, especially in the United States now. There is a big demand for people working in professions like that, and you can actually make quite good money. You have to stay out late, and some people may think the job is not so prestigious, but it was a great experience for me in order to put together this employment with my employment at Harvard to make enough money so my family could have a good quality of life. However, just less than a month ago now, I was able to receive a job, and I spent the entire time really that I was working as part-time lecturer applying for such jobs. I sent out so many applications to other jobs within Harvard University that would be not teaching jobs, but administrative jobs. And within universities, administrative jobs, often they are much more stable. If you get the job, usually it's a job that someone needs, and it doesn't depend so much on whether students are interested in your courses or whether someone is on leave or how many students sign up. And so these jobs are usually, even if they have a one-year contract, which many of them do, it's informally assumed that you will probably continue in your job for another year and another year. So this is the kind of job I wanted. Also, these jobs are much better paid than certainly a part-time lecturer or an adjunct lecturer, or even a full-time lecturer who is not on the tenure track. So this is really what I was working towards, and it took 2 years before I was able to receive an offer for this job at the Davis Center, where now I am assistant director in charge of helping Sasha to develop and implement our Scholars Without Borders program. So that's really the background I wanted to give on my experience, that it's very difficult to find a job. It depends on your publications. And oftentimes, even as someone with a degree from Harvard, I had to try and find other kinds of employment to do 2 or 3 jobs at a time, even here in America. And I think this is a position that probably many Scholars Without Borders have had their careers interrupted, even if they were publishing much more perhaps than I published when I was at Colgate University, and I interrupted my career to go work on this political campaign. Trying to find work in other countries besides your home country, where the academic system may be different, and where the degree of respect for articles and publications where you may have published may be different from one country to the next. So this is my experience, and I just wanted to sort of lay that out, and I would like to take some questions from you. I can answer lots of questions about certainly the American system, both for people trying to get jobs in teaching or trying to get jobs in universities outside of teaching, or other jobs entirely. Like I said, my friend who went to work in private industry. And hopefully this is useful also for the countries where you all find yourselves right now. So Ekaterina, please go ahead. You may ask the first question.
Thank you. Thank you, Jan, for your story. It's really challenging, especially the one which is concerning the bartender. I have a question concerning the adjunct position. Is it possible to apply for visa sponsorship if you suddenly get an adjunct position in some community college or somewhere else? No.
No, visa, because adjunct positions are so short term in America, they will almost never do a visa sponsorship. There are cases for, like I said, if you get a job that's a non-tenure track job, so for example, a job as a lecturer, which is for a contract for a year. Also, many American universities have positions called a visiting professor. And this is a non-tenure track job. that for example, in Colgate University and other universities, if there is a tenure track professor who goes on leave for a year to go do research, they need to hire someone to substitute for 1 year. And so these kinds of positions may be an opportunity for visa sponsorship. And usually it depends on how prominent the university is. So for Colgate University, this is the kind of university that was pretty prominent, and so they might do a visa sponsorship. For another university that maybe is not so prestigious, they just need somebody like maybe Texas Tech University. They just need someone to cover some courses, and they'll take anyone in America, but they might not have they might not decide to do a visa sponsorship.
Thank you. And may I ask another question, please?
Sure.
We had a meeting with Sergey Guriev, and he told us a wonderful phrase that in order to apply for a job in university, you should have an amount of publications which is compatible to your age. So that is, being not 20 years old, I'm interested, what is an approximate amount of publications which should be for the professor of middle age? No, maybe not professor, maybe
well,
lecturer.
it's hard to say, and it depends oftentimes, because I'm also not 20 years old anymore, right? So when, for example, I have 2 publications in top quality journals, if I were in my first or second year after my PhD, that would be a good position to apply for a job. But now I would say I'm 15 years done with my PhD, probably, I would say five articles in sort of prominent journals, and maybe 10 or 15, maybe 10 more articles that are in less prominent journals, maybe online journals or even publications that are not peer reviewed. Probably this is something many of you know, but there's an important distinction when assessing people's publication records between publications in journals that are peer reviewed, for example, like the journal Region that I recommended to you last week, and journals which are other publications which maybe somebody and they say, oh, please publish this article, or you send an article to some place and they don't send it out for external review and they publish. And so that's what I would say. If you, depending on what your field is, if you're in political science, certainly in the humanities, having a book that's published with an academic press, or a university press, that's probably a really important thing for someone at a later stage of your career. If you've never had a book published and you're my age, then you won't really have a good chance for a tenure track job. You might have a chance still for a visiting professor job or a non-tenure track job, though.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Evgeny, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Dan, for your introduction and for your story of your academic career. And I don't know, is this relevant? But this question is concerning so-called scholars at risk programs, which are existing at some of the universities. And for example, I know that York University opened this program again a couple of months ago. And what do you know about such programs? How are they working right now for those Russian, like for example, PhD students or postdocs for fleeing because of this current geopolitical and war situation? And how does these programs work right now? And maybe at your university, how does this works? Yeah, thank you for that.
So there are different kinds of programs, and I think the most prominent type of program, there's one at Harvard. I know Indiana University. It sounds like York. Many universities in the United States and Canada have opened up a program that's called, usually it's something like Scholars at Risk. And these programs are open to people who are professors, usually more senior people who are prominent in their field already, who really are in danger because of their political views or something like that, if they stayed in Russia or Belarus, or if they are from Ukraine and they're in physical danger because of the war. But the thing about these programs is usually they only can host one or two or three, a small amount of scholars. And so they tend to be very selective and select people who are not PhD students or postdocs, but more people who are really in the high level of their career, and they will get some financial support, some kind of salary. And these programs usually, again, these won't run on an annual basis. And I think in many cases, there is no expectation of teaching by the university that will bring you, but the expectation is you will be an expert and engage with the academic community. Maybe you will help advise some graduate students, and you will work on publishing your own research. So this is my understanding of these Scholars at Risk programs. Now, to speak about postdocs or graduate students, there can be different opportunities. Certainly, I think it's not uncommon for people who have spent their entire career, if you're a young person and you are still in aspirantura, in one of these countries where our program is addressing, maybe you can apply to actually become and join a PhD program as a student in the United States, especially if, as you, it sounds like your English is of high quality. Many PhD programs in different disciplines are particularly interested in having a very diverse group of students, and they like to have students who are from other countries. It's very common. And they also are, and now I think particularly interested, many of them, in supporting people who have had to flee because of the war. But for example, when I was at Texas Tech University, even before the war, I knew many students who were applicants, and they simply joined as a regular PhD student at Texas Tech University after they had completed their undergraduate degrees in places like Russia. I had one student from Voronezh who I think had been a student at VGU and finished her studentship there, and then she was a student at Texas Tech for her PhD degree. So this is something that for people in their earliest stages of their career, they can apply. Now, one thing I should say as well is that whether you're applying for a PhD program to be a student, whether you're applying for a postdoctoral fellowship like the one I had at University of Rochester, which also can be propitious for early stage academics who maybe they have just finished their kandidatska or something like that. Or you're applying for other positions, especially tenure track positions. There is a really important schedule of timeline when the applications for these things are due to the universities. And usually applications are due for any of these jobs to start in the following year. For example, if you would start in a PhD program in September of 2024, probably the application for most universities would be due in sometime like October or November or maybe December of 2023. So it's a long timeline, and this makes it very challenging. So you could put in your application for a job or a student position as a graduate student this fall, and then you wouldn't actually be able to go and start it for almost a year afterwards if you were able to gain admission to the program. Now, for jobs as a visiting professor, where you are often coming in for a year or maybe two to substitute for a professor in a university who has left, these jobs often have a shorter timeline. oftentimes the application will be due in January or February, or even later in the spring to start the fall right after. So it's a shorter timeline, often because the university doesn't know for sure what professors are going to be on leave until the middle of the spring semester for the following fall semester. So these can be a shorter timeline. And indeed, for universities where the professors, maybe they didn't decide, especially tenure track professors, they have the privilege of changing their mind at the last minute. There may be some places where the professors didn't decide until May or June that they were going to be on leave next year. And now the universities have to find somebody now to do a job in just 2 months or something like that. And so if there are universities that are scrambling now to find people, that they're still looking for the fall, these jobs may be propitious because they need to find someone quickly. And if you can, появиться at the right moment, this can be propitious, but it's hard to find these jobs.
Дэн, там
Thank you
есть,
for answering.
там есть вопросы в чате, посмотри, пожалуйста. А я
Посмотрю.
пока прокомментирую вопрос Евгения. Евгений, к сожалению, количество позиций по программе Scholars at Risk по всей Америке было очень невелико. Я думаю, что если в общей сложности на все Соединенные Штаты там наберется 40 человек, которые получили эти позиции, то это, так сказать, хорошее число. Более того, как правило, эти позиции были на 1 год. И люди, которые получили эти позиции, сейчас оказались в довольно сложном положении, потому что контракт закончился, в большинстве случаев его не продлевают, и они должны находить какие-то другие вакансии в других университетах, что очень сложно, или возвращаться куда-то назад. А куда? Возвратиться в Россию после позиции в американском университете – дело проблематичное. Поэтому, если честно, рассчитывать на позиции Scholars at Risk, наверное, не стоит. По нашим подсчетам, сейчас за границей находится, ну, скажем так, несколько тысяч ученых российских, ученых, преподавателей, и шансы получить такую позицию очень невелики. Поэтому лучше какую-то другую стратегию для себя избрать. Это мой комментарий. Дальше отдаю слово Дэну.
Yes, I wanted to answer the question and comment. First of all, the comments by Arseniy Kanov. Yeah, it's a challenging situation. The metaphor of a small number of life books, like Sasha was just saying, this is very true. To find a job that really is a great job that you will want to be in for several years, or maybe a career right away, is difficult. Like I said, it was difficult for me as a scholar, and I had some good recommendations, and I had some teaching experience, but I think it's very challenging for Scholars Without Borders. Dmitry Krutikov made the comment about getting recommendations to find a job in the USA, and a co-researcher. Yeah, I, for example, I had some contacts with a university in Dnipropetrovsk from when I visited there in 2015. And I had kept up some communications with someone there, and I received a request from a student of his who now is in Germany and trying to find a job in the United States to write a recommendation for her. But I had never met her, I had never worked with her, and I was not in a position that I could write a recommendation. But recommendations are an important part, especially if they are from people who are either prominent in the field, or if they are from people who the people at the university that's hiring are familiar with, and they know those people. And so one important goal of our Scholars Without Borders program, as it will be developed this year, is to try and build more opportunities for Scholars Without Borders, Scholars in Exile, to meet and work with other scholars who maybe are more prominent in the field, or just are more better known in either in Western countries or in local countries where you may be located, that are where people may have gone to live, like Georgia or Armenia or Kazakhstan. And so these opportunities, such as the mini grants, we hope that we will be able to develop, and mini conferences, these will hopefully be opportunities to help people develop the connections, the связи. I don't like to think that all jobs people can get are по блату, but even in America, there's an important element of knowing people and having connections in these universities. And anyone who had to flee Russia or Ukraine is in a difficult position of being in another country where they don't have these connections. And so we're really hoping that our program will play an important role in helping to develop connections, and even simply informal connections of people meet each other. Maybe in 6 months they think that, oh, I could collaborate in research with this person. I'll send an email, and just developing these relationships that will help people, maybe not right away, but be able to get the kinds of contacts that will help to reorient people's careers. But it may take a while. It may take more than 1 or 2 semesters. Let's see. There was another. Arsen.
Yeah, if I'm allowed, I just would like to make a short comment, kind of to develop a little bit my comments about what you just said. I just want to notice that actually it's really important, besides the opportunities for networking, for establishing связи and things like that for scholars in exile, for example. I think I can speak on behalf of people who are now in Georgia, for example. But it's like, I don't know how do you perceive this idea, but I think that first of all, people there, like social researchers. I can't say anything exact about people from the sciences, but for example, social researchers, their position of exile is in itself a very interesting experience for academics, and it's a kind of so to speak, self-ethnography, like some kind of methodological reflection about like the situation that we are in. And I think that supporting people who are able to provide such an insight into these quite extraordinary circumstances is quite important, because it's not just about helping people in need, but it's also about actually having some progress in social sciences, for example. Because it's we live in an unprecedented situation, and as social researchers, we have an obligation to actually to study it somehow from within. That's one point, and another point is that I don't think that it will sound too kind of condescending or something, but it's clear that the Western academia itself is in a bit of a trouble, and from the point of view of bureaucratization, also shrinking of funds, etc., and actually probably investing a little bit into more horizontal, more probably less clunky, etc. Forms of horizontal academic cooperation can be an interesting and viable model that later on will be applied to Western academic institution itself. like right now, so to speak, we can be your guinea pigs if we try to self-organize and you kind of help us out a little bit, and then maybe something useful can come out of it that will be useful for the Western academia itself in terms of horizontal cooperation. So I think it's a kind of a win-win.
Yeah, I think it can be. And it's, if you're a scholar in exile, it's a difficult position, but it does open up opportunities. Probably you know this English phrase that necessity is the mother of invention.
Exactly.
Right? And one of the in terms of these kinds of more horizontal opportunities, one thing that many universities, Harvard and MIT and other universities in the United States, have been developing for a long time are the idea of this idea of a MOOC, massive open online class, right? That's free, but that the actual instructors and researchers at a place like Harvard and MIT, they're engaged with these MOOCs, even if it's, they spend much less time on them, and many of them are pre-recorded. But that's an important way too. Evgeny was talking about connections for recommendations, but this is a way that people can participate, and they can do it for free, and maybe they can develop a relationship with some of the people who are helping to administer the class. Also, like I said, the institutions like the Harvard Extension School, or if you wanted to take an online class, for example, the kinds of classes that I worked with at Texas Tech University. Maybe you are familiar with this terminology, but when we talk about online courses, there's a terminology of synchronous and asynchronous and hybrid, right? So just for everyone, an asynchronous course is one where the students simply log in and they watch the videos, and there's no actual interaction in real time with instructors. A synchronous course, though, you actually get to have this interaction and develop some rapport, and you can actually, develop the kind of relationship where later you can say, oh, do you know of any opportunities for me? Or do you think you know my work well enough to write a recommendation for me, or something like that? And then we have hybrid classes, and most online classes, really, the best ones are hybrid because they involve a lot of material that is asynchronous and recorded, but they also involve a live session. So this can be the kind of opportunity, and this is a big area that many universities in the United States and Europe have been extending into, to try and have a wider reach than only to the people who can actually show up on campus. Certainly at working for the Harvard Extension School, you have to pay money for many of these classes. For a MOOC, it will be free. For the Harvard Extension School or Texas Tech, you might have to pay $1,000 or $2,000, and maybe you don't have the money just to develop contacts. But it can also be a good way if you're at an early stage in your career and thinking of trying to enroll in a PhD program in the United States or Western Europe. Just having that additional educational experience on your PhD program application can be useful, and maybe you can learn some important new skills or do some work on new topics that you haven't worked before. And so it can be really educational, edifying for you, maybe if you have the resources, in addition to being an important way to sort of develop sviazi, which are so important.
Yeah, like one of the opportunities, but I'd say that, like, generally, again, I'm talking on behalf of like an independent researcher who had some experience in the academia in Russia, like more on the periphery, but still I was pretty familiar with pretty much everything that was happening these recent years. And I'd also like to kind of mention the model of an open university. So in the context, in the circumstances of increasing pressure on academic freedoms that we experienced in Russia, for example, all these recent years, actually, even before the war started, many people from the academia, especially, like, the outliers, the independently thinking people, they were kind of forced to do their teaching to kind of develop some new educational materials and actually to kind of perpetuate this free academic thinking outside of the institutions, because within these institutions,
Sasha was explaining to me about this free university that's a virtual that's developed. And in the West, I think in terms of a university, this is not this idea hasn't caught on of kind of a new institution, because the credentialing process is so important for receiving a university degree. But there are lots of things that are similar to this. For example, I'm sure you've seen YouTube productions that are very high quality, especially history. I used some really excellent ones about the Czech legions that were in the Russian Civil War. I found some amazing online productions that were not connected to a university, but some independent scholars, perhaps like yourself, that I used in my classes. And, this is a thing, probably you're all familiar with this idea in social media of being a social media influencer, right? And people who, and mostly it's people who are becoming popular on social media and then trying to sell shampoo or skincare products or something about beauty. But I know there's many opportunities for sort of more intellectual production. And again, it's not under any university, but in the sort of the free market of a YouTube marketplace, if you can begin to be seen as appealing, and it becomes the intersection of education and entertainment, which, can feel a little bit, there can be some tension there. For example, I produce many videos for my online courses at Texas Tech. And, I felt like, well, am I really trying to be entertaining? I don't think I was very effective as an entertainer. This is another question. But there's lots of different opportunities. And like I said, I think another important idea is the idea of opportunities outside of academic work that might be in private industry. If you have experience with online work, you don't have to be a kind of computer programmer who can write Python to get a job with a company that's producing academic educational software. I have a friend who she actually did her degree in an American university. She's an American. She did her degree in Spanish and Latin American literature. And while she was in her degree program, her PhD program, the program actually was decertified as a PhD program, which meant she would basically have no opportunity to get a job with a university because she had a degree from a non-certified program. But she actually got a job, and it's entirely remote, working on producing educational materials for an online educational program. And it's entirely remote, so you could potentially do it from any country in the world. She does it from somewhere in upstate New York. But these kinds of other sorts of opportunities, in fact, she might be a really interesting person to try and have a session like this sometime in the coming weeks. We only have about 5 more minutes, so I just want to conclude with some ideas that we're going forward with other sessions. And again, many of the sessions now that we're having are they're not so academic as more sort of administrative and ideas. I know that we're going to have a session with 2 of the important people who are managers at the Davis Center, talking about job applications and how they, not from an academic perspective, but from the perspective of looking at sort of for people applying for non-academic jobs, like the job that I just got, how they look at resumes and how resumes can be formatted and what they're interested in. I'll be interested actually to participate in this session, since it was the 2 of them who they looked at my resume when I applied for my current job just a couple of months ago, and how they evaluated me and other candidates. Maybe they don't want to say in public how they evaluated me, but this will be an interesting session. We're going to have a session hopefully in the next week or 2 with a friend of mine who is the managing editor of a Western academic journal. It's actually published in Korea, but it's an English language academic journal of humanities and social science that publishes peer-reviewed articles that I mentioned it a few, I think in the chat with Guriev. And this managing editor will be able to give some tips, because the publication standards and modalities for such a journal might be different from what people are used to if they've been publishing in Russian or other places. So this can be a useful thing for people. And also a friend of mine who has, she's actually a researcher in the biological sciences. And she had a postdoc in Vienna, and she has a friend who is actually Russian herself, who also has a postdoc in this institute. And we hope to bring her on to give some useful commentary especially for people who are in biology, chemistry, any of these sort of laboratory sciences. And I'm not sure how many of you are in these laboratory sciences versus the social sciences, but I hope that will be a very useful session, because there are lots of jobs that are maybe not very academically prestigious, but are very well paying, where you can be a researcher, maybe in a public research institution, or even in a private, pharmaceutical company, that might be great opportunities. So I think we're about out of time. Sasha, did you want to have the last word or anything to discuss as we're departing?
Дэн, спасибо. Я просто хочу сказать, что, как уже сказал Дэн, мы планируем в ближайшее время проводить такие же встречи, которые будут именно практикоориентированные, которые подскажут вам, как лучше написать резюме, как лучше пройти интервью и какие-то другие практические вещи. Мы понимаем, что очень многие здесь находятся в сложном положении. И, конечно, наша задача максимально помочь вам в том, чтобы вы смогли найти работу, продолжить свою карьеру. Собственно, ради этого эта программа создана. Спасибо всем большое, кто пришел послушать Дэна, и будем встречаться дальше. Спасибо вам огромное.
Пожалуйста, если есть еще вопросы, можно задать на канал Telegram, и я стараюсь ответить на всех. До свидания, спасибо.
Спасибо.